Okay, good morning. We proceed with the first session of the symposium entitled Smart Technologies Transforming the Energy Market. I would first of all start by thanking the organizers for inviting me. It's really very challenging to chair this first session about digitization in energy. I come from the GRC. The GRC is the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Our role is basically to work hard in order to provide evidence for policymakers in Brussels to try to help them in making better policies. We are a bunch of scientists working on different fields. I am particularly working on economics. And I work on the digital economy unit at the GRC. So we've been dealing with digitization for the past 10 years. So we know a lot about digital technologies and some of the impacts that they can have. We've been looking initially at some more famous sectors, music, travel, etc., sectors that were, let's say, first shocked by the first wave of digitization, but now digital has become pervasive and it's everywhere. And we are observing how this pervasiveness is really diffusing to, let's say, more traditional sectors or sectors that were originally less vulnerable to digital technologies. And in that respect, a year ago or so, we sit down and we started thinking, and we started a project on the study of the digital transformation of the European economy as a whole. And then we start discussing and brainstorming about which sectors could we really look at. And then we decided to look at governments, so how governments themselves are being transformed by digital technologies, how decision-making, collective decision-making can be improved by the uptake of some of these technologies. This is directly in line with some of the comments of Professor Boehringer before, in terms of can we make policymakers a little bit smarter than we think they are. Then also we choose other sectors, important sectors for the economy, like transport and construction, and also energy. Okay, and we started looking at the digital transformation of energy. Why energy? Well, energy is, first of all, is one of the 10 priorities of the current EU Commission, Juncker Commission. And in order to make the European economy more modern, this Energy Union initiative has to work in parallel or in close collaboration with other initiatives. And the other, let's say, flagship initiative of this commission is the digital single market. So if you combine digital and energy, obviously you have the digital transformation of energy. The report will be published very soon. Unfortunately, it's not available as of today, but will be soon. I would say, to be more or less sure about my bets, in April, you will already be able to look at it. And obviously, it's a collection of drivers and barriers of digital transformation in energy. As you can see, more of the issues that Professor Boehringer touched upon in his presentation will be already there. And we'll already know a lot of things. And I would just, before giving the floor to the colleagues that will present today, let me just say that one thing we know from the economics of digitization is that all the market failures Professor Boehringer listed before are reinforced with digital. So asymmetric information is even worse with digital technologies. Market power is even worse with digital technologies. Externalities, couldn't say really much, but we have a very important externality, which is called network externality, which is absolutely at the core of increased concentration of market power, as we can see from the platforms that Professor Boehringer already mentioned. So the challenges are quite interesting, because obviously we cannot deny the value of digital technologies in terms of efficiency of communication or facilitating innovation, etc. But on the other hand, there are several societal risks that we have to take care, and they're very important. And the problem is that we don't know much about the impacts, because we are at very early stages of this huge transformation that is taking place and can, for sure, modify and transform all human activities in the future. Okay? And for that particular reason, I think research is most important, and initiatives such as this symposium is fantastic because it puts the stone into the important issues and important problems and brings people to talk to each other and exchange ideas and create new research questions. I'm sure many of you will just go to your offices once the symposium is off. You will start thinking about this, and you will start producing papers, which is obviously an externality that this symposium creates every year, so it's fantastic. For this particular session, we have three magnificent papers, in my opinion, that will deal with some of the aspects and the details of the digitalization in energy. You will see. Let me just remind the speakers that you have 15 minutes for presentations, and then we will give the floor for questions just after each presentation, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end also for collecting more aggregated questions, more general questions, okay? So we start with Patrícia from the University of Coimbra on the assessment of regulatory and market factors in the investment levels of markets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to begin by greeting Professor Maria Teresa and all of the audience. Thank you once again for having me here. It's a pleasure. It's quite, I'm quite enthusiastic to be once again part of this symposium, which is a very important moment in the University of Barcelona and also in Europe. This is an excellent opportunity to have here people from many different countries and with very different backgrounds. So I'm Patrícia Pereira da Silva, and I'm with the Faculty of Economics of the University of Coimbra in Portugal, and I'm also associated with an initiative called Energy for Sustainability, which congregates many professors, researchers, and students with different backgrounds, ranging from business and economics to the different fields of engineering, psychologists, sociologists, architectures, everybody related to energy. Today I will present the results of a research paper co-authored by myself, Nuno Figueiredo, and Yvonne Vogt, where we explored how market and regulatory factors affect stakeholders' investment in smart grid projects in Europe. I will begin by giving a quick introduction of smart grids and a general overview investment landscape in Europe. I will then go into more detail about the objective of this study and present the applied methodology, results, and final conclusions. So we know already that the clean energy transition is driving a movement towards a smarter electricity sector, with the increasing shares of renewable energy sources. The smart grid is a modernization of the traditional grid that uses digital technology to manage the transport of electricity from generation to meet demands of the end user. This exchange of information has the potential to help facilitate the integration of renewable energy systems, energy efficiency, demand response, and more. Thus, central technology in achieving European Union energy goals is relying on smart grids. Nevertheless, cost is a major barrier. Thus, heavy investment is necessary, and tailored regulations can create the framework to incentivize these investments. We know that since 2002, the European Union has invested almost 5 billion euros in 950 smart grid projects, 540 in research and development, and 410 in demonstration. We have here a map from the Joint Research Center that we have just heard that gathers empirical evidence. So that's where we got our data to build this paper. It's quite interesting to see that the biggest investor groups are made of distribution system operators, the DSOs, universities, and the technology manufacturers with a cumulative of 2,286 million euros invested spread across different European countries. So, considering these trends, it would be interesting to consider if regulatory and market factors play a key role in the level of investment by different stakeholders in Europe. So, the question was first tackled by Carlo Gambini and his colleagues, who looked at the investments by DSOs in smart grid projects. They classified countries based on regulatory and market mechanisms in order to see if these had any impact on the level of investment by DSOs in these countries. They found that DSOs in countries with a low distribution sector concentration, incentive-based regulations, and innovative stimulus mechanisms tended to invest more in smart grid projects. We applied and expanded on this methodology to consider the top 3 investors in Europe through a larger time scale in order to understand if these mechanisms have an impact on multiple stakeholders and if we can help to come up with policy recommendations for decision makers to design adequate incentives for stakeholders. So, in order to do this study, we considered the investment data from the smart grid research by the JRC from 2008 to 2015. We normalized the investment based on the population in each country and the GDP in each country with average data from those years. Finally, we considered the regulatory and market classifications set by the Gambini study and his colleagues. This refers to the level of market concentration in the electricity sector, by which each country was assigned a concentration of high, medium, or low labels. The high concentration refers to countries with one DSO that distributes 99 to 100% of power. Medium, which refers to the dominant DSO that serves 80% of power, or the 3 largest producers together deliver 60%, or low, that refers to the 3 largest DSOs that deliver 50% of power. The incentive-based refers to the mechanisms using rewards and penalties to motivate performance. Cost-based regulatory mechanism refers to the combination, to the use of cost of production to determine prices, or hybrid models that mix incentive and cost-based mechanisms. Having or not having innovative stimulus mechanisms in place, which include adding an extra bonus to the regulatory weighted average costs of capital, and or adjusting revenues by applying specific rewards. Once we gathered the data sources, the first step was to compile all the information and normalize the investments based on GDP and population and classify them. This is just an example. I don't see if it's really readable from the audience. So if we look at Austria, the first line of the table, from 2002 to 2015, we can see that it was invested 22 euros of smart grid investment per million euros of GDP and 0.83 euros per capita. This is the remaining table and the associated data classification. So we applied, in order to determine the appropriate statistical tests to be used to compare these samples, 3 assumptions must be addressed. The normality, which will determine if a parametric or non-parametric test is to be used, independent observations, and homogeneity of variances. The results of the normality test show that we had both normally and non-normal data, mostly non-normal data. So we performed both T-student and Mann-Whitney U tests. The independence assumption was satisfied due to the fact that none of the investments in one country overlapped with another. Levine's tests verified almost authenticity, except in 2 cases. We tested our null hypothesis that investments in one case versus another are unchanged, or the alternative hypothesis where the investments in one case are larger than another. So, for example, if we are comparing distribution sector concentration, we should compare all countries with a low concentration against a medium, low, against high, and medium against high, in order to see if there is any change in investment level based on this classification. So, results related to the distribution sector concentration. We know that for DSOs there is not a big change in investment level based on the concentration, and if any, there is a slightly higher investment between medium to high and between low and high, but significance values are too low to make any concrete statements, as you can see by the results in the table. For both technology manufacturers, TM in the table, and universities, there seem to be higher investment in countries with low distribution sector concentration compared to medium and high, with no difference when comparing the level of investments between medium and high concentrations. However, this is only the case if we consider the normalization of euro per capita, and this does not hold true under the normalization of euro per millions of euro of GDP. When evaluating 3 stakeholders, we cannot support the claim that there is a positive correlation between countries with low concentrated distribution sectors and level of smart grid investments. This could be attributed to the point drawn by Agrel in a paper from 2013, that while the unbundling of the electricity sector provides many benefits in terms of competition, it also presents more actors, which leads to more negotiations that at the end of the day result in compromises that would lead to underinvestment. Going on to the regulatory mechanism results, we know that for DSOs there is a high significance level between investment in countries employing incentive-based compared to cost-based mechanism, which is consistent with the study from Marx from 2014, who argued that cost-based regulations may not spur investments in a technology such as smart grid, and it's not a capital-intensive technology and can limit its operation costs. Considering technology manufacturers, countries with hybrid regulatory mechanisms tend to invest more than in cost-based, and there is little difference between other mechanisms. The higher investment level in hybrid schemes when compared to cost-based schemes for both DSOs and technology manufacturers may be attributed to the fact that smart grid technologies do not require a high capital investment and can save on operational costs. With universities, there does not seem to be a significant difference in the investment level between any of the regulatory mechanisms. As knowledge-seeking institutions, one hypothesis is that university investments are following more the interests of the scientific community rather than regulatory policies or the market. In contrast, DSOs and technology manufacturers are more susceptible to regulatory changes because they are more market-motivated by nature. The last results relate to the innovation stimulus mechanism, and we can say that for both DSOs and technology manufacturers, high significance can be found when comparing the countries that have innovation stimulus mechanisms in place and those that do not. With universities, there does not seem to be a significant difference in the investment level between the countries employing and not employing these mechanisms. One reason for this difference could be the role of the university as a collaborator. According to the study by Gangal in 2017, universities make up the group who collaborates the most on projects with the other stakeholders. Because of this, the level of investments by universities may be more motivated by the different projects they collaborate on, independent of market mechanisms. So, as major conclusions, we can gather some initial conclusions from this work. Unlike Campini's study, distribution sector concentration did not have high impact on investment. Difference between market-minded stakeholders and collaborative knowledge-seeking institutes was also a result. So we believe that policymakers should consider these results when designing adequate incentives to each stakeholder involved in smart grid research and development and deployment. Whilst the development of any new technology is based on research and development at universities, technology providers somehow support this research and development and deploy pilot and demonstration projects to be of interest to market operators, such as DSOs. As we attempt to transition to a cleaner energy economy, major updates will need to be done on our electricity sector. The smart grid is one key technology that will be incredibly important in this energy transition, and we should continue to develop further mechanisms that encourage investments in these projects to further develop this technology. And these are some of the major references that we draw our results upon, and we have to thank the Joint Research Center for making publicly available the database that we used in this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes for questions, so if there is anyone willing to ask a question, please, now is the moment.
In the end.
No?
Professor Maria Teresa, in the end.
Okay, we can exactly move, and then we can collect all the questions in the at the end. Okay, second presentation is Maria Loureiro from University of Santiago de Compostela. And her paper is entitled Comparing Sentiment Analysis Results about Climate Change Between Twitter Conversations and State Preference Surveys.
Well, thank you very, very much for the invitation. I should thank Professor Costa for making it possible for me to be here today, and also all her team. I changed slightly a little bit the title just to make sure that I'm sufficiently inclusive to tell you a few things I'm working on so that I don't deviate too much from the objectives of the current session as well. But I will tell you for sure what I'm supposed to as well, or hopefully so. Let me try to pass this. Well, let me initiate my talk by motivating it a little bit and why I'm looking into big data and social big data in particular. There is a paper published by Einaf and Levin in Science 2014 that was an inspiration for me. There they describe how data is changing, how collection of data is changing, how economic models are being also changed, how it's possible now to adjust and to measure at real time issues and events, and how data is transforming our research agenda. So now we are focusing basically on the fact that we are able to collect practically universal data sets. And in terms of some issues, such as perceptions toward climate change, that's rather important. That's rather innovative as well. So I thought, wow, that's so interesting what can be done, that I'm going to be looking at how we can learn from Twitter, from unsolicited Twitter conversations. This has been done in the past, let me say. There has been some pioneer work done in English. but no one has looked into the conversations going on in Spanish, for instance. And being Spanish such a relevant language worldwide, I thought it was rather relevant to look at how the Spanish-speaking community is understanding and connecting to others with respect to climate change. Why this is important? Well, because here in Spain and in Europe we see climate change in a particular issue, and in Latin America they see it in a very different way. So I start looking at this and collecting worldwide data on Twitter conversations that I want to share with you. So my first part of the talk is going to be about how humans can act as sensors worldwide, and how our conversations can predict and relate to our feelings, and from that, how hopefully in the future, how all this information can be collected to be structured into indexes that can go into other models. The second part of my talk, if I have the time, I will try to tell you a little bit of how humans behave around sensors. And that's a different project that I'm working on, but I thought it would be nice to also present it, given that we are talking about smart grids and all this type of technology here. So let's see how the time takes me. I'm sure you are well aware of the pioneer work done by VII, our microeconomics professor of many of us, all his books and publications, that look into the very importance of how we can only collect, or basically just by collecting Google searches, we can understand perceptions and awareness and concerns of the current population. And his pioneer work in the 2000s have illustrated and encouraged many others to look at social networks nowadays. So for sure, looking at Google Trends, we can already start feeling that, well, in the US, global warming is an important issue, but particularly it's concentrated in some areas, such as California, Texas, Florida, and some parts in the Northeast. That makes real sense, particularly. And we could look at opinions and thoughts. Well, how is this in fact the fact that now climate change is taking over the word global warming? How are they referring to climate? And in fact, yeah, it seems that climate change is much more relevant than global warming nowadays in terms of these kind of conversations. And we could go on and see that, well, in reality, climate change in Spain in the last years was not a very recurrent topic. Probably we had other issues to look at, other concerns as a society, but let's look into more detail on what Twitter is telling us and what the conversations from Twitter can tell us. So I start looking at Twitter using sentiment analysis tools. Sentiment analysis are very popular among linguistics, sociologists, and psychologists. They are not so usually conducted in economics, but they are rather important for those who do state preference analysis and valuation scenarios. So I thought that's great. So our idea is, as I said, is going to be to present some statistical indexes about awareness and concerns related to climate change. Worldwide. We can do it worldwide, or at least this is our intention. A similar project that you can look at and is very nicely referenced is the one called Pulse by United Nations, in which they also collect Twitter conversations to understand how Twitter can be used as an early warning system, so that when there is a problem in a particular area, let's say Thailand, they figure out, okay, what's happening in this particular area and how evacuation scenarios can be figured out, or how we can deal with emergency situations. So let me introduce you my modest, so far, project. This has been financed by the Ministry of Science in Spain, and those who are familiar with this type of calls, you know that they are not very generous in terms of finances, but we are trying our very best here. We have collected all tweets coming related to climate change and cambio climático, and all related words from Spain, all Latin American speaking countries, and all US. Well, and all English speaking countries, sorry. I said US just because I wanted to present you a few scenarios and data related to the US, but basically what we collected is all English and Spanish speaking conversations in Twitter, differentiating between English from the UK and English from the US as well. So nowadays, right now, we are still collecting it, downloading data, and we are hoping to do so as long as the project lasts, and hopefully we can figure out if there is some generous angel that can give us some money to keep this going. We have more than 20 million tweets at the moment, and we have 2.9 million users identified, different users. So we are collecting all these type of conversations that are happening. Our users are institutional users and public users, of course, so public accounts, but also certainly highly relevant are the private accounts. So we are doing some work in terms also of figuring out the type of users we have in this data set. So at the moment, we run some libraries and so on, and we are able to identify the gender in most of the cases, and 2/3 of all the tweets we know, even just with the username and a few other details, whether the tweet, whether a male or a female is tweeting, where the tweet is coming from, the originality of the tweet, and so on and so forth. So we are collecting, as I said, we are still in the process of collecting all this data and trying to make sense of that. So we also collected data on terms of socio-demographic conditions of all the areas. After the tweets have been georeferentiated, we have collected data on income, we have collected data on weather, and a lot of weather variables, in particular outside temperatures, whether or not there was some particular climatic event, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, so on and so forth. We also have some thermometers that measure the minimum, the maximum temperatures, and so on and so forth, for all the particular points. So let me show you how, just graphically, what I want to show you here is that basically our little Spanish project, this global sentiment project, is becoming really large because, as you can see here, I think that's the best image that illustrates that climate change is a very international topic nowadays. This is a very broad topic that you see is all over the place by the georeferentiated tweets. In terms of our own research, of course, we focus much more. These are the Spanish-speaking tweets that we have on the data set, with Spain being very prevalent, but many other countries as well, such as Mexico, Argentina as well, and Colombia, etc. If my colleagues are there, they could introduce the videos, that would be great. This is the video of the tweets of the 2018. We have two videos, one from the US and one from Spain. Very quickly, a few second videos that I prepared for you so that they will be very, hopefully, illustrative. I don't know if yes, the videos? Yes, this is the US. These are the conversations 2018 US, and also you see, well, we will see here part of Latin America's Mexico, El Salvador, Panama, etc. So this is an impression, right? These are August, we are over the summer. You can relate afterwards all these tweets with all these natural events occurring, summer storms, hurricanes, etc. This is October, November, now January, these last couple of days, and we switch off. Let me show you Spain and continental Europe, all we can see from here. And as you see here, of course, humans act as sensors as well, so we have a bunch of information coming out from Barcelona, Madrid, the largest cities. But you also may not expect so much going on also in the north of Spain in terms of conversations related to climate change, which is something quite new, such as in Bilbao, all the Asturias, Oviedo, Orense, which is also a very warm city in the summer, right? So this is helping us to understand how emotions and sentiments are being created in terms of climate change awareness and concerns. We call it, in our team, we call this map Mapa de Calor, because if we related it with the highest temperatures in the season, it really is very, very highly predicted. Toledo, Madrid, Sevilla, Malaga, and etc. You see that is highly correlated. So, but how do we analyze this data in order to make it feasible, in order to make it understandable, and in order to afterwards be treated in economic models? Well, our objective is twofold. First of all, we started looking into opinion polls and European surveys. For instance, we have the Eurobarometer survey as a point of reference. In addition, we are collecting data on state preference surveys as well in the US, in Mexico, in Spain, and a few countries more. And what we are looking at is some responses that were given in very respected surveys, such as European Social Survey on, for instance, how worried are you about climate change? Not worried at all, and so on. These are the responses that the Spanish citizens gave. So 42% indicated to be very worried, and 38% somewhat. For the Eurobarometer, you see sort of a Likert scale of from not very serious at all of a problem until 10, extremely serious, and you see there the percentage of distributions. So what we are trying to figure out here is that how we could use in this type of, in this setting, our Twitter data in order to come up with an index of awareness or concern of unhappiness towards climate change. And we use what is called the hedonometer. I think I have 5 minutes, and I hope to be just on time for telling you this. So the hedonometer, as the name indicates, tries to relate words with happiness, or impressions, or unhappiness. It's not only happiness, also unhappiness. And the idea is that it takes a lot of work to do this for the very first time, particularly, for instance, when we do it for the Spanish-speaking countries, we have to consider that although all we speak a common language, our language has some particular identities in each particular country and some particular differences. So we have to come up with specific libraries or use a common library and then to update it for each particular country. Such as, for instance, in Latin America, we have to consider the adjective chévere, right? Like, whereas in Spain we don't use chévere. But we have to try to consider this importance in terms of languages. So how it works is the following. You have imagined that the most popular words related to climate change conversations can be contained in 5,000 words. So you start with this dictionary of 5,000 words. And these 5,000 words, then you subtract, you can use Amazon Mechanical Turk to figure out what is the related level of unhappiness or happiness from 1 to 10 of these words. So you do that for each single exercise and for each particular country, and you will come up with an algorithm for this hedonometer, which is basically a weighted average that considers the weight that you give to a word times the relative presence of this word in terms of the total conversation. And from there, you can collect or come up with a construct similar to a type of cardinal utility, sort of, from most positive to least positive. So we rank all these words, and you can also use Mechanical Turk, and like in the US, it's quite common. You use like 20, 30 words, and you try to rank them all, and you do that in very large samples and rather quickly. And you come up with some particular impacts or weights that individuals give to particular terms. For example, you may think funeral is associated with a relative high level of unhappiness, and it's true. The score from 1 to 10 is 2.1. But worse than a funeral is even, because a funeral is also an act of remembering a person, it's an act of closure, it's an act of sharing as well. Much worse than a funeral can be even a terrorist act that contains a level of happiness from 1 to 10 of 1.3, right, one of the lowest. On the opposite, laughter in the Spanish is laughter and fiesta are our keywords of happiness, of excellence, 8.5 in this particular case. But food also for us, very important, 7.4. So what we are trying is to come up with a relative assessment of each particular concern that relates to climate change conversations. And just to conclude, I have here an example that looks into the scores of Mexico and Spain, just for a comparison. And as you may see here, well, this is a dual graph in which, in the right-hand side, we present the negative feelings, and in the left-hand side, we present the positive feelings. For example, just to summarize, what do we see as a concern in both? In Mexico and Spain, it shows that climate change is an important concern. In Mexico, they talk about climate change very much related to themselves, how they themselves feel, how Mexico will be affected by climate change. Whereas in our case, we talk in a more abstract way of climate change. Climate change is happening, this and that, but it's not like it's here, it's making us suffer. Furthermore, in Latin America, they emphasize quite a lot the lack of resources, falta de dinero, also issues with politicians, and so on and so forth. Whereas maybe in Spain, they emphasize more the lack of instruments and the lack of proper policies rather than maybe resources. They focus more on lack of incentives, lack of proper policies. And Also, they perceive that it's a concern related to the quality of life, vivir bien, and it decreases utility also with respect to other events such as wildfire. It's also related to cancer, which was a discovery, and so on and so forth. So with all that, what we're trying to collect is a different type of indexes that will allow us to compare how perceptions are moving over time, because we are going to be doing this collection over time and over many countries, and so that we will be able to understand how worried are you about the climate now and maybe in 3-4 years following Twitter conversations around the world. But we will not only focus maybe on climate, we will look at other issues, we will look at policies, effectiveness of policies, subsidies, green subsidies, and so on and so forth. Now we are downloading all this data that also contains, of course, information on policies, subsidies, and so on and so forth. So in summary, of course, we are seeing that people also can be we work as sensors for sure. We transmit a lot of information, and this information we are transmitting is very, very valuable, as has been put forward already by the first speaker. And hopefully, in our case, it can be used also to create a geospatial data set in terms of awareness and concerns that is also related to other data sets that have been publicly available before and related to the Eurobarometer and many others. So due to the lack of time, I can only tell you this little bit, and I remain available for all comments, suggestions, and thoughts you may have. Thank you very much.
Fascinating research indeed. Let's move to the third presentation, which is Sarah Darby on demand response as more technology in theory and practice, the significance of system actors and customer experiences.
Right, when I find my...
There.
Yeah? Ah, there we are, good, yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for my invitation. And it's a bit of a surprise to be here because I'm not an economist. But I hope we can have a useful conversation in spite of all that. I come from the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford. We're a multidisciplinary and an interdisciplinary institution. We run 5 programs: climate, energy, food, water, and ecosystems. And at the moment, I'm the acting leader of the energy program there. So, energy transition. I'd like to put it to you that where electricity is concerned at any event, this transition means that we are moving from demand-led systems to supply-led systems. So in the old days, you predicted what the demand was going to be, and you built enough power stations to meet that demand. You didn't ask very much about what the demand was or anything. You just predicted we are going to need so many gigawatt hours next year, we're going to need so many gigawatts of power at peak, and you constructed your system on that basis. We're now moving in the direction of a supply-led system, where we will have available renewable resources. They will vary over time, and we will need to match the demand to that supply. So this is a really big paradigm shift. So this is, as you know, you have to match an electricity system in real time. You have to match the supply to the demand, millisecond by millisecond. It's a very precise business, and the wonderful people at the National Grids do that. So this is a schematic showing that you can do this from the supply side, as we used to do, by increasing capacity or building peaking plant, and through continuous balancing using the inertia of your turbines, or you can do it on the demand side. So that looks like a nice sort of even balance. You can do it by one or the other. But it isn't really an even balance at all, because the supply side, traditionally, is very concentrated in a few hands. But the demand side is all of us, okay? It's everybody and what they do. So it's much more distributed is the demand side. So another part of this transition is that we're moving from demand-led to supply-led, but we're also moving from centralized to distributed. And it's distributed demand because demand is distributed by definition, but it's also more distributed supply. And that's why I'm going to talk about, when we bring in the smart word, as engineers have been fond of pointing out, electricity systems have been smart for a long time. If by being smart you mean they're using information technology. They've been using this for decades now, but they've only been using it at the top end, at the high voltage level. And what we're seeing now is that smartness is percolating down, and we have ICT involved at all levels. So that's why that's why we should perhaps be particularly interested in what's happening in small businesses, in commerce, and in residential demand. Residential demand is interesting, I think, because, of course, it's substantial. Worldwide, it is growing. It's not growing in every country, but it is worldwide. In a lot of countries, it's a disproportionate share of the peak demand. In our country, certainly, our peak demand is between about 5 and 8 p.m. on a winter evening, when industry and commerce is still going on, but people are coming home from work, switching on the lights, watching TV, having a shower, and so on. So it's important from a peak demand point of view, which means it's important from a system sizing point of view. And it's always changing. So we're getting new loads all the time as we discover new things to do with electricity, like Bitcoin mining. Also, it's part of policy that we should be thinking of electrifying heating more in order to run that off renewables. We have electric vehicles coming on the grid. Increasingly, especially in southern Europe, there are cooling loads which become very substantial in the summer. And a good news story, it's changing in the other direction when it comes to lighting. So one regulation, at any rate, that we should perhaps be very thankful for are the European regulations that have kicked in about lighting over the last 15 years or so. Because thanks to LED lighting, more than anything else, peak load in my country has been coming down over the past 10 years or so. And it's complex, as I say. It's very distributed, is residential demand. It's many services, it's many actors and activities. And this matters when we're thinking about system flexibility in a transformed electricity system. Where is the scope for making this demand more flexible? Well, is television watching flexible? It's more flexible than it used to be now because, of course, you can store programs. But if your team is playing tonight, you probably aren't going to want to wait 2 hours before you watch them. So entertainment, not so much. Cooking, again, you're hungry. You're not going to wait 2 hours for your dinner because the electricity price is high. That, too, is not very flexible. But if you look at the cold appliances, which can be switched on and off very rapidly through direct load control without you even knowing about it, for fast, flexible response, they're available. The water heating, again, that's the thing where it isn't very time sensitive. And the space heating, again, there is some room for flexibility there. And if you add those three things together, for my country at any rate, you get about a third of the total consumption. So that's some potential flexible demand that you have there. Yes, there are also, as you will have gathered, different levels of flexibility you might want. So in the very long term, you want conservation. You want to bring demand down. And so for that, it's a question of looking at the way we live our lives and how efficiently we do it. So in that identity that Professor Boehringer gave us in his in his opening talk, he talked about the the determinants of overall carbon emissions. And you'll remember that one of them was GDP per person. Where I come from, we talk about that in terms of energy services per person. I think it fits in the same place in that equation. But we have to think in terms of what are our service requirements for doing the things that generate GDP, but also doing the things that don't necessarily affect GDP, but we still need to function and to be comfortable. So in the long run, we need to be thinking about service requirements, and we need to be thinking about investing in efficiency. And then at the very far end, you have dynamic demand, which is matching the system in real time, second to second. And then in between, you have these different sort of levels. And a couple of years ago, some colleagues and I came up with this schematic as a way of conceptualizing how you get demand response. So we have this three-dimensional space that you can fill. And the three dimensions that we think matter, that are all things that can be changed to improve the level of demand response, are the sort of service expectation, how much of an energy service do we want, what sort of technologies do we have for achieving that, and how well we know and understand those technologies and can use them and deploy them. And if you want the full response you need to bring into play all those things. And we were offering a bit of a critique of a lot of current assumptions and current models in that they tend to focus just on the technologies and on the price incentive. And that we were saying we can broaden out from this. And it will be helpful for modeling and also helpful for planning for demand response in future. Yes, we all know these diagrams. They all look very neat, and there's usually one element that is strikingly missing from them. They're uninhabited. And yet, this is kind of odd. So on the demand side, you think of all the things that people are doing with an electricity system as they go about their lives. You know, they're not just looking after themselves, they're looking after their built environment, the transport system, and as we move into smart grid times, they may actually be participants in network activity through demand response and storing, trading, generating their own electricity and so on. On the supply side too, there's a great deal going on. So we're talking about everything here, from cognitive psychology right up to political economy. So again, you know, a plea to broaden out the conversation about energy. It really isn't all just about engineering and economics. Right, now to get on to my case study. I hope I'm not... 5 minutes, jolly good. This was a big H2020 project that we started nearly 4 years ago now, and that came to an end last spring. And we were testing out small-scale smart thermal storage. And we were testing it out in Ireland, Germany, and Latvia to see whether this could benefit participants throughout the energy market. So it's thermal storage, so that's quite promising, okay? It's got quite a lot of flexible possibilities. Do any of you know about storage heating? Not every country has storage heaters. Anyone had a storage heater? One person, yes, from England, yes. Did you have? It was awful, yeah. I think your experience is quite a common one. A storage heater is basically a pile of bricks that you put in an insulated case. You heat it up very, very hot overnight with cheap electricity. And then, because it's insulated, it lets out the heat more slowly. However, usually it lets out most of the heat in the morning. By the time you get around to the evening, people are getting cold. It's quite clunky, and you then have to pay extra, you know, for peak time electricity to heat yourself up. So they're not great, these storage heaters, but there are a lot of them across Europe, and they have they use a lot of electricity. They were typically brought in at the time that nuclear power came in, because suddenly there was all this generation overnight, and there wasn't anything to sell it to. So storage heating was brought in. And financially, it looks pretty attractive in terms of what you can store in water tanks and in storage heaters, and the cost of it. So the offer made to the customers was, you could move from this rather unpleasant-looking heater on the left. Was yours like this? Pretty much, yes. Which has clunky controls to something that looks nicer, that is better insulated, so it lets out the heat more gradually, and you can have digital controls and you can control it better. So this was the customer offer that was made to people. And this project started, like projects tend to, on a great wave of techno-optimism. We have the kit, we have it, everything ready, we just need to try it out with real people in real situations. So, and in the spectrum that I showed you a bit earlier, we're down here, really. We're with real-time dynamic pricing, and we're with a mixture, really, of price response and direct load control. We used lots of different methods to take a look at this, from the quantitative data to actually going into people's homes and talking with them about their experience of the heating. So, did we manage to achieve what we set out for? Well, yes. After over 2 years of hard work, it was possible to get all the separate bits of equipment connected up, communicating with each other, and available for demand response for about 2/3 of the total load. Why 2/3? Well, some of the kit didn't work properly, and people switched things off at times, you know? They just felt like switching them off, and so they did. It was their home, it was their right to do it. So it was possible. But it was difficult, and it was difficult technically, and we found, as the social researchers, we found this, you know, quite entertaining, really, because the techie people had been so sure that everything was going to be okay, but each separate item was working fine at the beginning of the project. The challenge is getting the connectivity. There was also, of course, a challenge recruiting customers because of issues like data privacy, consumer protection. You have to be extremely careful when you're doing this, very rightly so. It's quite a lengthy business persuading people, and the learning takes time. So I think it was actually a very productive project, but it did take a lot longer to get working than we thought it would. And we found at the end, looking at the customer experience, we found 5 things came through as crucial. And it was seen throughout that the customer experience was going to be really important, because if the customers aren't interested in doing this, then you don't have your demand response. You have to have happy customers. So comfort came top of the list. It came even higher than cost. I'm saying this to a bunch of economists. This was even more important than cost. Of course, cost mattered, yes. But, comfort came top. Then there was control, care, and connectivity. These 3 different types of communication, all of them important. When we talk about smart, we talk so much about stuff talking to stuff. What we found here was it's absolutely crucial that people are able to communicate with stuff and that people are able to communicate with people. And there were many, many actors involved in all this. I mean, it really involved a lot of people as well as a lot of different types of stuff. So we shouldn't underestimate in a smart future the complexity of what we're taking on there. I won't even... So for example, if you're running it too, you have to think about the cost, because all these actors have to share the value of the demand response. There's quite a value chain there. There are a lot of values. There are a lot of actors in there. So the flexibility has to be worth a lot for everybody to get a piece of the pie here. So this just shows you just a very small aspect of it. If a customer phones in with a complaint, and you see a list of possible complaints, problems down the left-hand side, these are the people who may have to be involved in sorting it out. So to go back to it again, lots of actors, very important. And to go right back to here, when we think of the smart grid, let's remember that, the smartness is not just in the stuff. It's not just in the digital. It's very much a human set of issues as well. So it's part of my ambition that over the next few years, we're going to start seeing these diagrams get populated a bit more. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, we have some time for a general round of questions. So please raise your hand and indicate to who your question is addressed. Anyone? No? Yeah.
Hello, I'm José García Quevedo from the University of Barcelona. I'm from the Chair of Energy Sustainability. I have two questions, one for the first presenter and one for the second one. First, I would like, you have analyzed a very specific innovation mechanism, and I would like to know if you plan to analyze or it will be important to take into account other innovation mechanisms to analyze these investments in the smart grids. And then the second question is, I think the work very, very interesting. I have a curiosity, how do you know the difference between institutional and individual? How do you plan to deal with that, or it's important or not?
No more questions from the floor, because I have some questions also for the speakers. Here. There, and then here in the front.
I'm Annette Bohm. I'm from Copenhagen Business School, and I would like to ask Sarah what the price incentive was in this case study that you had. Thank you.
One more questions. We let the presenters reply, and then we do another round.
Juan Rosellón, CIVI and DIW Berlin. One question for Professor Loureiro. I don't know if you also considered the percentage of people that use Twitter in Latin America as opposed to Spain, for example. Because even in Mexico, for example, the people that can use Twitter is a small part of the total.
Thank you. So we reply, and then we ask for more questions.
Thank you for your question. Concerning the innovation mechanisms, we wish we had more disaggregated data to crunch some numbers in a more accurate way. We hope that, we know that the Joint Research Center is updating this database, but they're not sharing with us the level of disaggregation as we wished. So it's a request that I leave. But yes, it's a line of work that we wish to go further on.
Well, thank you for your questions. I will respond to both of them. There was one about institutional versus private accounts. And yeah, how do we know it? Because usually what we have done, there are two ways in which we can know that. But basically, institutional accounts, like, for instance, FAO. So we search for FAO, and we mark it as an institutional account. And we do that manually, or we have checked that manually for more than 5,000 accounts in English-speaking countries, just only. In terms of, but how can that, the very large ones are super easy to identify, but it's quite difficult when you go low to the local level of NGOs and other type of consumer associations and so on. That is very difficult. But the large actors on the climate change debate, we think that we have identified them with full accuracy. But as I said, local actors is a different story. What we are going to do with them, or how that can be important, is because the theory of networks tell us how people relate to others. And institutions, public institutions that are relevant and present in the climate change debate are supposed to be the leaders of the debate, and others can be the followers. So we also collect tweets and retweets of different accounts, and we are working on that. But this is going to be the second stage of our research. The first one is to understand what is going on in terms of spreading conversations and spreading knowledge knowledge spreading concerns and so on and so forth. And the second is going to be more about the role of the followers versus the leaders on the climate change debate, and how leaders may influence followers and so on. In terms of bias, that's a very important issue. How do you adjust the fact that in some Latin American countries, Twitter has much less use and introduction than for instance, here in Europe or so? Well, that's a very important issue that many people are working on in terms of developing. You are going to be surprised, but in terms of adjusting for these biases, what is usually done is thanks to different algorithms that make weight more the opinion of people, let's say, that comes from the particular and poor areas or areas in which there is deprivation or particular issues. There are different ways in which we can adjust it, because IT people are working a lot on making this information more representative. And there are a lot of research at the moment that is going on. We have not adjusted so far our data. So far what we can do is to present the overall information, but also to consider the high-income classes. So we can compare the high-income class debate of Mexico City with, for instance, New York, with quite a good accuracy. Again, in the low income level and medium income level, there we are much more shaky, of course. But hopefully, through the last part of this year, we will be implementing these algorithms by which we try to use weights, as at times our Instituto Nacional de Estadística does, right? Try to make more weight or make more important the conversations that are coming for these people that are underrepresented in the sample. But this has not been done so far. It's a very, very large, difficult work and duty, in fact, to do that. Thank you.
Sorry, please.
Yes, and Annette, your question about the price incentive. I forget what it was in Germany, but in Ireland, the customers were offered €10 a month for taking part in the trial. Plus, and this was the biggest incentive, really, they got nice new heaters. Yeah, so that was the big one, yes. At the end of the trial, the economic modelers who had worked on this, they reckoned that it wouldn't really work unless customers only got about €5 a month, or that they wouldn't benefit by much more than that if the whole thing was working as planned. So they were saying they stopped rolling out on that basis because it was just going to be too expensive to be giving people the new heaters as well. But there has been an interesting development in both Germany and in Britain since that trial, in that at least 2 companies now are offering a service to customers which is about flexible EV charging, but if you have storage heaters, you can bring those into the package as well. So storage heating is now being incorporated in some actual demand response business models, bundled up with electric vehicle charging, is my understanding. So storage heating on its own, not yet.
Thank you. Are there more questions from the floor? Please.
Thank you to the panel for the very interesting talks. My question was to Maria. I was wondering whether with your data you could see whether changes in the politicians, let's say Bolsonaro, Trump, etc., influence these sentiments, no? Because if you see that there is this influence, it's quite disturbing somehow.
Well, there is a paper that has analyzed Donald Trump's tweets in terms of climate change and their impact on the media. It's being under review, not written by me, but I know it's being under review. So, yeah, there is an effect, and already it's being investigated, that's for sure.
Thank you. More questions? If there are no questions, I will take a license, 5 minutes. I will ask 1 question per speaker. And then we will finish. First, for Patrícia, although the quality of the data, I think it's very nice. It's a unique data set. So have you considered the possibility to also enlarge the research by maybe using different methodologies like research analysis, regression analysis, where you can really have kind of cause-effect relationship between the issues that you're analyzing?
We could not even use a micro panel data. There is no, the number of observations is not sufficient. So it's impossible with this number. So we are really looking forward for the update that we know that the new database will come forward by the end of 2019, we were told. The survey is being updated. And hopefully then we can do some more serious econometric analysis. With this type of data, it's completely impossible. We cannot make some casual regressions, we cannot infer informations, it would be completely biased.
Thank you. My second question is for Maria. In my impression is that sentiment is kind of a psychological construct. Cannot be measured with precision, like intelligence or happiness. So to what extent your results about sentiment are consistent with others' researchers' results about sentiment? So there is like kind of a literature where there are some standardization of measures that everybody agrees upon, or is every researcher is providing his new measure of sentiment? And also I endorse the concerns about biased data.
Well, yes, it's true that sentiment is a subjective measurement, like many others. Others will discuss that. Well, it's not clear either how intelligence should be measured, or we could open a very, very large debate. But although it's subjective, it's becoming more and more important. And you know that political parties all work on sentiment analysis before, prior, and after the elections, and so on and so forth. All that considered, is true that the scientific community has to agree on measures, standardized measures. And what I presented is becoming quite used. I'm not saying it's super top, but it's quite used in terms of collecting and representing information. I am much used, to be honest with you, I have done a lot of continuum evaluation analysis, so I am so used at the representations of sentiment that for me sentiment is, rather than being a weak measure, is a very respected measure. And I am under the impression that sentiment has much more relevance than what usually in traditional standard economic theory has been given to. But it's true that much has to be done still, and we are still in the process, and we are all learning. And it's true that this data has some biases, as has been indicated, the representational biases. But there is also a lot of work that is being done at the moment, trying to understand fairness on the internet and how we can approach these conversations in terms of, and evaluate these conversations in terms of fairness and equal standing of opportunities, right? Much has to be done still, of course. We are in the process, hopefully, of learning at least a little bit more. But many are indicating, well, you know, bias, who cares about bias? You know, some computer science will tell you, who cares about bias? Pretty soon, with algorithms based on artificial intelligence, I will tell you who said what. So,
I totally understand. Let me just say that this is an important debate,
yes,
because the digitization implies basically the massive use of algorithms. Algorithms, in order to work, are trained with data. If the data is biased, algorithms will start making biased decisions. If this is the world we want.
Yeah. And so, if the algorithm is unfair, it will reproduce
relying
unfairness.
on important data is very important, and from empirical analysis we know that biased results are not necessarily consistent. But obviously I am fascinated by research, and I think big data techniques will really change the whole world of empirical analysis in the future.
I understand the concerns, yes.
My last question is for Sarah. Have you considered in your research the role of education? And the question is the following. I know, at least from the health sector, that early childhood education on basic medical information and training can, when these people become adults, imply massive savings in healthcare budgets, because they stop going to the doctor just for a cold, which obviously implies a societal huge cost. So in the case of energy, could education play a similar role? So educating people in light of the future that we can envisage, in order to make people more energy efficient, energy concerned, energy wise, in order to be able to save energy?
Sure. I think you touched on something central, very, very important there. I think we have to very much, though, try to tie the education to the world around us and the signals we get from the world around us. You know, you can only do with a thermostat what the thermostat lets you do. For example, the hotel room I was in last night, the thermostat went from about 4 degrees Celsius up to 30. And you think, well, what kind of a message is that sending me, you know? And what does that mean in energy terms, you know, if you have that sort of range? So, you know, there's the material world around us and the educational signals, as it were, that sends out. Sure, there's the constant sort of discussions we have about what sort of life is a good life, and, you know, what are the energy implications of that? Yeah, it happens at all sorts of levels. And also, you will have seen among the actors listed up there, a lot of them needed quite a lot of training to be able to do what they could do. And I do think the sort of training for living in a smart world and being aware of, you know, all the possibilities and all the pitfalls, yeah, very important, yeah.
We need to move towards human-centered technological change, clearly. Thank you very much for your attention, and I just hope that you enjoyed this session as much as I did. Thank you very much.